Origin. Indacnius stood up from his throne. It was time for his decree to resonate through the kingdom. His boots were of an iron luster, brilliant as the moon's. He wore leather with his signature purple cloak. His mask was fearless. It was crafted eon past, and carried with it the trials and tribulations of a kingdom deceased. He bore this all as he declared to his people, littering the halls, waiting for his words. It is time this kingdom move on into its next phase of rule. The crowd cheered for miles. We have taken on battles thought only to be a fool's bargain, but look at our victories, grand and opulent. His words echoed across the granite etched in the walls, forged by the labor toiled for in his kingdom, all in Indacnius's name. I will rise to a new heavenly disk, a mythical land I have seen with my own eyes, and I will take our kingdom with us. Previous battles were won with sword and blood, with conquest and ammunition, but today's battle, and the next one, will be a warfare not known by man since the first river. The crowd cheered for miles. Indacnius walked forward and cast his rugged blade into the stones before him. He pulled off his mask, revealing his brown, rugged hair and dark face, scarred from battles past. None can stop the Taloom conquests today, or the next day, or into eternity. And then, with but a few more steps, Indacnius ascended. He became translucent, like the great discs above, and hovered among the crowds. They were silent as they watched, until they all joined him. All were hovering upward. All were translucent. Thousands upon tens of thousands lifted up, defying space itself. The sun began to set. The distant orange sky diminished into a faded violet. They were headed towards it. But as they rose and descended, following their king, merely one fragment lay behind in the nature of the world underneath. One artifact fell from Indacnius' grip, forgotten to him and forgotten to time. The kingdom was silent. The halls were vacant. But in front of the throne, and in front of the sword, it sat there. The ceramic mask, resting upon the kingdom, now without a king or people. A lone mask rests there, waiting. Prologue. It was a gentle breeze that afternoon, which pushed along the river. Delicate, geometrical curves, lines, and debris greeted the surface of the water, forming waves and minor currents. Petals from nearby blooming trees fell down in a seemingly slow-motion movement. The river extended on and on for miles ahead, curving and meandering far off into a blurry horizon, complemented by exploding oranges and violets as the sun touched down on the earth. The accompanying trees on the side of the river, the distant crests and outlines of mountains in the distance, and all the foliage and life in between, seemed to sing along with the river's motion, warm, calm, and tranquil. But this scene was an oddity. It was an unusual time in the Taloom kingdom, where a mid-afternoon was not haunted by ferocious gusts or violent storms. Sunsets were never so vivid and colorful, as the sky was typically clogged by storm clouds and infinite winds. Something strange was going on in the air, but no one could put a finger on it. A boat began to drift through the waters, gently pushing its way onward. Two men, both middle-aged, sat patiently and rowed. By a look in their eyes, it was apparent that they were appreciative for this afternoon of calm, even if it was strange. They rowed quietly for about an hour, almost meditative in their motions. This afternoon was a time to be savored. Finally, they came to a stop in an even stiller part of the water, with a slightly wider area, wide enough to linger for a time. The men looked at each other in understanding, clipped the oars to the side of the boat, and began to pull out a large net together with their 4 hands. It took a minute or two for them to untangle it into a fishing-ready position. Then, with a huff, They threw it in the water and anchored it down. They sat back, satisfied with their progress thus far, and began to chat after another couple moments of rest. "So," one of them began, "quite a strange week it's been, huh, Deif?" Deif smirked, putting a finger through his now overgrown, grayish beard as he chewed on that thought. "Which part's stranger, you think? Me now being a grandfather, or the fact we're fishing in the evening?" The men shared a chuckle. "Remt," Deif went on, "I appreciate you coming out here again, I really do. But you know it wasn't necessary, right? I was gonna get my boy a gilded Floutrish one way or another." Remt, with slightly more ashen hair than Deif, turned to him with an almost offended expression. "No, that's exactly the reason I came, lad. I wouldn't be doing you and myself a disservice if I didn't pass on my grandfatherly experience to a close friend, so to say. Plus, as you mentioned, there really is no better time to fish than now. Frankly, I'm surprised we're not bombarded by dozens of other boats thinking the same thing." "Right, well, we did wander out in the wilderness. For a good couple of hours," Deif retorted. "Ah, yes, that's true. But even to have an opportunity like this, Deif, think of it. When's the last time you could say you're going fishing for gilded Floutrish? We haven't had such a sight as this for who knows how long." Deif thought about what Remt said for a moment. He glanced to the side as if peering into his memories. Then he responded. "His 10th birthday. That was the last time I've ever fished for gilded Floutrish, which would have been 2 decades ago." "See?" Remt went on as if winning some grand argument. "Despite the annoyance coming out here with you, granted that it exists, I couldn't pass tonight up. Even if there's only enough for one, I'm fine just to see the fish in person. It's been so long." "Well, fine by me. I won't turn down the extra hand," Deif responded, closing the discussion temporarily. The violets and oranges fused into a deeper, rich navy purple and blue as the sky blackened. It had only taken 15 minutes between the setting of the sun and a full darkening of the skies above. Time in Taloom seemed to move differently compared to other regions. As to why, the answer had not been known as long as these men had existed. Deif and Remt pressed on under all this luminosity. In addition to dropping nets, Floutrish also responded well to corbel, a type of liquor in the area, or at least that is what Deif believed. He couldn't often test his theory anyway. They were called gilded Floutrish not because the scales were shining or made of gold. Instead, the name arose from their long-lasting qualities. Months can pass before they go bad, and almost like distant fruits, a decently preserved gilded Floutrish actually tasted better about 3 weeks after death. Some way or another, it became a tradition among Taloomans to gift Floutrish to new parents, and Deif was trying to make good on this tradition by scoring a trophy-level fish. As the last decades were festered with storms, the tradition stopped temporarily. Gilded Floutrish seemed to travel eastward towards the greater Noxish prefecture, where storms were more subdued. In their stead were other common fish, but in the last couple weeks, Talooman fishers began seeing a return of the old, previously native Talooman species, Denfor, Wishtil, Carcum, Corlept, and apparently even gilded Floutrish. That news was enough for Deif to make the decision to try for a gilded Floutrish himself. Sure, it had been 20 years, but if someone else could find it, so could he. After the sky grew dark, it lit up shortly after. 3 moons rose to illuminate the river below like candles in a dark home. Dust, and whatever other particles floated beneath the surface, shone with nuanced iridescence. Remt leaned back further into the boat with a deep sigh as Deif worked to carefully drip corbel into the water at random intervals. There was also a superstition that gilded Floutrish could tell what was bait and what wasn't, so a random pattern of baiting was preferable to a repetitive, predictable one. Some time passed, and Deif's eagerness began to taper out, as his bottle of corbel did too. Remt, recovering with a yawn, leaned up to make a sly remark. "What, are you telling me the great Deif can't remember his master fishing technique from, say, 20 years ago? I thought you might be rusty, but not completely out of touch." The joke fell flat. "Ha ha, Remt, very funny." Remt shrugged and leaned in towards Deif. "I don't see any gilded Floutrish getting near the net," Deif went on. It's like the Corbel isn't even working, or they're not even here or something. And yet, Lelkton caught 2 last week, and his cousin in Westloom caught 6. Lelkton's always a terrible fib, Deif. He just wants to look like the best fisher in town, the poor drunk, Remt quickly confided. Even still, why is it just my luck that tonight I'll be empty-handed? His words bounced off the water and dissipated into the environment. Remt wanted to say something again in that moment, but wasn't sure what. After all, he hadn't been fishing much Floutrish either in the last couple decades. Keep at it. You'll find it eventually, I'm sure, he managed to let out. Deif grunted a bit in response, but remained fixated on his work, watching as the Corbel diffused into the body of water more and more. He held the net steadily, a bead of sweat dripping down his forehead despite the cool air. Remt shrugged and leaned back, returning to his half-nap. Time passed. The water resting upon the net bubbled. Deif himself had started to doze off before he noticed it. There was a thrashing sound in the water. Could it be there, then? Deif leaned in towards it, and Remt again leaned over to take a peek as well. Like a small bubbling growing into a roaring boil, the energy in the water grew and grew, and then it burst out. There was an explosion, and a gushing of current which flew yards and yards into the air, flicking the boat with it a good yard into the trees on shore. Deif and Remt helped each other up, bodies bruised, in a moment as the last of their gargantuan waterfall dissipated back into the river. Waves still forming in the aftershock, but it was not an explosion that caused this, but some great 2-story tall mirror resting upon the surface of the water. This monument, for some reason, flew up, and now hovered in that exact spot where the boat was moments ago. A giant stone oval, textured like the side of a mountain, rough and jagged, rested there. The ring itself was a thick material beyond what the men knew. The center of it appeared to be reflective at first, but upon second glance was a sort of luminous, dense sheet of green and blue waves. It rumbled with a deep yet piercing tone, harmonizing with the birds and the wind in the distance. The monument itself was so bright it could pass as a 4th moon. Remt stood back, reverent, hesitant to even say a word. Deif seemed floored as well. An energy pierced the air and glided through the winds, yet besides the hum, the world was just as still as before. The only difference was that now there was a capsized boat, 2 bruised men, and an otherworldly floating piece of architecture in these woods. Can you even describe this thing? Is this some sort of Indacnian ruse? Were the only words Remt was able to mutter out. Deif felt something different after the shock. After breathing in this monument and standing before it momentarily, the words Remt said hit Deif's face like a light breeze against a wall. He was in a different world. That monument's glare had a pulling, a yearning towards Deif, stronger than any gravity and more explosive than any celestial body above. He had to enter the monument. He had to be one with it. And so Deif leaped forward. "Lad, what are you doing?" Remt snapped out of his trance when he realized Deif was doing the insane. He was running up to the shore, despite his bruises, and swimming through the water straight up to the monument. "Stop! You don't know what that is!" He didn't know why he felt such a conviction to stay away from the thing, but he knew it was wrong. Like the energy it emitted should be avoided at all costs. Deif moved onward, like the Floutrish he hoped for. He grasped on to the bottom curve of the monument with all his might, and thrusting himself upward, jumped straight through it. Remt saw him jump through one side, and heard a splash out the other. It would appear Deif just jumped straight through the thing, but an uncontrollable urge to flee came over Remt. Run. And so Remt defied himself and went with his gut. He flipped over the boat, quickly shoved it into the water, and went the direction opposite the monument, back towards home. never looking back. He began to paddle as fast as he could, abandoning the forest and abandoning his friend. Remt couldn't explain why, but he knew something terrible happened to Deif when he heard that splash. He knew, without even checking, that he was gone. He drowned, Remt told himself. He drowned trying to climb the monument, and now he's dead. He rowed the oars with more might than he could muster, choking up as tears welled up in his eyes. The moons descended over the distant horizon as a sun in the opposite direction peeked out its head. Remt had been rowing for a couple of hours, but was exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Tears were rolling down his face as he began to see outskirts of Talooman society draw nearer towards him. I abandoned him, Remt thought scornfully. I left him, and I don't know why or how, but I know he is dead. There is one less father, one less grandfather, and I have one less friend in the world now. Remt sobbed to himself quietly, took a deep breath, and began to paddle some more. He would soon near his village, where he would bear grim news beyond comprehension. Destination. Outside the portal, a corpse was flung into the field. Matehadtk, with his gruesome features and serpentine body, crawled from the nearby basin and ate of the stones underneath the corpse. He stood with a renewed fervor and smelled the blood of this ancient fisherman. Matehadtk ate the portal as well, and walked on into the infinite obsidian plains, leaving the corpse to dry and fester. A strange whisper came in the distance. No one has ever known you, Deif. No one will not know you. You are erased forever to the 6th Eon.